What happens when a government stops seeing its citizens as human beings and begins seeing them as resources? Resources that can be controlled, manipulated, displayed, and ultimately sacrificed. In our earlier analysis of the Hunger Games, we explored the global issue, the abuse of political power through the exploitation and dehumanization of ordinary citizens. The capital takes citizens from the districts and transforms them into tributes. The reaping selects them. Caesar's interviews package them for public consumption. The game makers manipulate their environment, and the games transform their suffering and death into spectacle. The individual becomes an instrument through which political power is maintained. But this disturbing idea does not belong only to dystopian fiction, because now we move from Panem to revolutionary Iran. Welcome to Between the Lines, literary analysis with Smitha, where we explore how literature and popular culture texts represent some of the most urgent global issues of our world. Today we turn to Marjane Satrapi's graphic memoir, Persepolis, and our focus is the chapter The Key. Like the Hunger Games, this chapter asks a disturbing question. What happens when political power decides that some human lives are expendable? Persepolis recounts Satrapi's childhood during the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War. In The Key, the war has created an enormous demand for soldiers. But Satrapi reveals something crucial. The burden of sacrifice is not distributed equally. Poor adolescent young men are recruited, indoctrinated with promises of martyrdom, and given cheap plastic keys painted gold. They are told that these keys will open the gates of paradise if they die in battle. The youth are therefore not simply recruited, they are manipulated through their poverty, youth, and religious faith. And that is precisely where our global issue emerges. Political power exploits vulnerability in order to make human beings willing participants in their own destruction. Let's begin with the central visual symbol, the key. A key normally signifies access. It opens something previously closed, suggesting possibility, freedom, and opportunity. But Satrapi turns that symbolism upside down. The key does not open a door to life. It persuades a citizen to accept death. And notice the material from which it is made. It's not gold, it's plastic painted gold. That contrast is crucial. Gold appearance to plastic reality. The object itself becomes a visual metaphor for political propaganda. The promise is magnificent, the reality is worthless. Paradise is presented as a reward, while the actual political objective is brutally practical. The regime needs bodies for the battlefield. The citizen sees a key to heaven. The political system sees a soldier who can be sacrificed. And that difference between what the citizen is made to see and what those in power actually want exposes exploitation at its most disturbing. But Satrapi introduces another crucial dimension: class. Marjane discovers that the keys are specifically given to poor citizens. When she asks payment Whether boys at his school receive keys to paradise, he does not even understand what she means. Suddenly, the social divide becomes visible. Two citizens living in the same country, living through the same war, but possessing completely different values in the eyes of the political system. The privileged citizen is protected, the poor citizen becomes expendable. Satrapi therefore exposes a hierarchy of human worth: poverty to vulnerability to exploitation and sacrifice. Political power succeeds because it identifies those citizens who have the fewest alternatives and transforms their deprivation into a weapon against them. The promise of paradise becomes particularly seductive precisely because their earthly lives offer them so little. Satrapi's narration makes this dehumanization explicit when she describes thousands of young citizens dying on the minefields. Think about that shift in scale. We move from one mother's fear for her son to thousands. Individual identity disappears into mass death, and this is where Satrapi's choice of the graphic novel form becomes extraordinarily powerful. Look at the citizens in the minefield panel. They are rendered largely as black silhouettes. We cannot distinguish one citizen clearly from another. Individual facial identity disappears. They become repeated dark forms thrown into the air by explosions. This is not simply an illustration of death, it visually represents dehumanization. The state has already stopped seeing these citizens as individuals, and Satrapi makes us confront what that looks like. Citizen, soldier, silhouette, casualty. Their names disappear, their personalities disappear, their futures disappear. Only their usefulness to the political system remains. Now look at the composition. The minefield image occupies an unusually large portion of the page. That matters. Throughout a graphic novel, panel size controls the reader's pace. A larger panel interrupts the normal rhythm of reading and demands that we stop. Satrapi forces us to look. The citizens' bodies appear suspended in the explosion. There's chaotic movement around them, but their black silhouettes create an almost horrifying visual pattern. And hanging around their necks are the keys. The promised objects of salvation remain visible at the very moment that the citizens' bodies are being destroyed. That creates devastating visual irony. The key supposedly guarantees paradise, but the only reality available to the youth is violent death. Satrapi therefore places propaganda and consequences inside the same image. The promise hangs around their necks, the truth surrounds their bodies. And then comes perhaps the most powerful graphic technique in the extract: juxtaposition. Immediately beneath the image of the boys exploding on the minefield, Satrapi shows Marjane at her first party. Look carefully at the visual parallel. In the upper panel, young bodies are thrown into the air by explosions. In the lower panel, young bodies are thrown into the air by dancing. Both groups are young, both are airborne, both wear objects around their necks. But their realities could not be more different. For the poor ones, The necklace is the key to paradise. For Marjane, it's a punk necklace made from chains and nails. One group experiences adolescence through death, the other experiences adolescence through music, fashion, and rebellion. Satrapi makes class inequality visible through parallel composition. The resemblance between the panels forces us to notice the difference between them. The citizens above are virtually anonymous silhouettes. The teenagers below possess faces, expressions, clothing, and individual identities. One group has been reduced to bodies, the other remains recognizably human. That is dehumanization rendered visually. Satrapi's characteristic black and white aesthetic intensifies the effect. There is no patriotic color, no glorious battlefield, no golden paradise, no visual romanticization of martyrdom. Instead, the stark contrast strips the government's ideology of its spectacle. The citizens have been promised something magnificent. Satrapi gives us something brutally simple: black bodies against violent white explosions. The simplicity is accusatory. She refuses to aestheticize their deaths. And because this is a graphic memoir, image and narration work together. The political authorities construct one story. Martyrdom is glorious. Satrapi constructs the counter story. Citizens are being exploited. And now we can see why Persepolis connects so powerfully with the Hunger Games. President Snow's capital and Satrapi's Iranian regime are very different political systems, but both texts expose a similar mechanism of power. In the Hunger Games, district citizen to tribute, spectacle, sacrifice. In Persepolis, poor citizen, martyr, political instrument leading to sacrifice. The capital promises fame, honor, spectacle. The regime in Persepolis promises paradise and martyrdom. Different promises, different political contexts, but the same fundamental abuse. Those in power manufacture narratives that makes the suffering of the powerless politically useful. And in both texts, citizens pay the price. That is why the key is such a powerful representation of our global issue, the abuse of political power through the exploitation and dehumanization of ordinary citizens. Through symbolism, black and white contrast, silhouettes, panel size, composition, parallel composition, visual irony, and juxtaposition, Satrapi exposes how political propaganda can transform vulnerable citizens from human beings with futures into expendable instruments of power. Satrapi makes us see what political power has taken away: their youth, their individuality, their future, and ultimately their humanity. In the next episode, we'll explore a few other moments where abuse of power becomes evident through bureaucratic procedures, institutional control, and loopholes in the law. Our focus will be on the chapters The Passport and the Dowry. In The Passport, Satrapi reveals how bureaucracy can become a form of violence when an ordinary citizen's survival depends upon state permission. In The Dowry, she exposes something even more disturbing: how legal and religious loopholes can be manipulated to justify the violation, execution, and commodification of an individual. Till then, keep looking, keep questioning, keep reading between the lines. This is Between the Lines Literary Analysis with Smitha. Thank you for joining me.